learn English through story. The Forbidden Kiss of Lust. Elena Winters stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse. The soft fabric felt foreign against her skin, a stark contrast to the frayed edges of her reality. She looked into her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The once vibrant spark in her hazel eyes had dimmed, and her hair, once lustrous and alive, seemed to hang lifelessly around her shoulders. At 32, she was a woman trapped in a life that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. It was a Friday evening, and her husband, Daniel, was out with friends, a welcome escape for him, she thought. As she finished getting ready, she felt a flicker of excitement. Tonight, she would attend the opening of an art exhibit at the Aria Gallery. Art had always been her passion, the language through which she expressed herself, but lately, even that passion had begun to fade. Teaching art at the local community college had turned into a routine, and the fire that once fueled her creativity had dwindled to a flickering flame. As she drove through the dimly lit streets, the weight of her unfulfilled dreams pressed heavily on her chest. She had always wanted more from life, and more excitement, more passion, more love. But the reality of her marriage to Daniel was a comfort she had long since settled into. He was a good man, responsible and steady, but their relationship had devolved into a predictable pattern of routines and obligations. The thrill of young love had given way to a comforting familiarity, which, over the years, had grown increasingly suffocating. When she arrived at the gallery, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. The soft hum of conversations mingled with the clinking of glasses and the faint strains of music. Elena stepped inside, the brightness of the lights and the vibrancy of the paintings washing over her. She wandered through the space, taking in the various expressions of creativity, her heart beating in time with the pulse of the crowd. But it was one painting that drew her in like a moth to a flame. A striking canvas splashed with bold strokes of crimson and deep blues, the brushwork raw and emotive. It was a piece by Marcus Hale, a name she recognized but had never associated with a face. The painting seemed to pulse with life, capturing a depth of emotion that resonated deeply within her. As she stood lost in thought, she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she was met with the gaze of a tall man, his dark hair tousled and his piercing blue eyes studying her intently. There was an air of familiarity in his scrutiny, as if he could see straight through her carefully crafted facade. "Do you like it?" he asked, his voice smooth, with an edge of something raw and unfiltered. "It's a broken bar stunning?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like it's alive," he smiled, a flash of something magnetic in his expression. "That's what I aim for. Art should evoke a response, don't you think? It should make you feel something." Elena nodded, caught off guard by the intensity of his gaze. "It does. It makes me feel a broken bar alive." "Alive?" he repeated, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. "That's a rare thing these days." They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Elena felt a stir within her, an awakening of the emotions she had buried beneath the weight of her life. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending a hand. "Elena," she replied, taking his hand. The connection was electric, sending a shiver up her spine. They talked, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and the world of art that had brought them together. Marcus was open, unguarded, and Elena found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't felt in years. With each passing moment, the bond between them deepened, and Elena's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and dread. Hours slipped away, and soon, the gallery was closing. As they walked toward the exit, the city lights twinkled in the distance, casting a warm glow on the pavement. "Would you like to grab a drink?" Marcus asked, his eyes hopeful. Elena hesitated, glancing at her watch. It was late, and she felt the familiar pang of guilt. A broken bar. I shouldn't. My husband will be wondering where I am. He nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face, but he didn't push her. I understand, but maybe we could meet again? I'd love to talk more about art or anything. Really. The promise hung in the air between them, palpable and electric. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the strength of her desire. I'd like that. As they exchanged numbers, Elena felt a thrill rush through her, mingled with fear. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but for the first time in years, she felt alive, yet truly alive. In the following weeks, their texts grew more frequent, their conversations more intimate. Each message felt like a tiny rebellion against the monotony of her life. Elena found herself anticipating each exchange, the words igniting a spark within her that she hadn't realized was extinguished. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Elena received a message from Marcus inviting her to a private showing of his new work. The thrill of attending an event centered around him sent butterflies fluttering in her stomach. As she stood before her mirror, preparing for the evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world that was both exhilarating and terrifying. What had started as an innocent friendship had morphed into something much deeper, something forbidden. The gallery was dimly lit, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Marcus greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I'm glad you made it, he said, leading her through the space filled with his latest creations. Each piece reflected a piece of his soul, a narrative woven through color and texture. I can see your heart in your work, she said, her voice filled with awe. Art is an expression of the self. You, of all people, should know that, he replied, his gaze piercing into her. As the evening wore on, the guests mingled, sipping wine and discussing the art. But Elena and Marcus drifted away from the crowd, drawn to a secluded corner where a stunning piece caught her eye, a large canvas depicting a couple locked in an embrace, their bodies intertwined, the intensity of their connection almost palpable. Do you believe in love like that? Marcus asked, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Elena swallowed hard, the question sending a tremor through her. I used to. Used to? He echoed, his brows knitting together. Things have changed, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I told you that you deserve to feel that way again? He said, stepping closer. The intensity of his gaze sent her heart racing, and suddenly, the air felt thick with unspoken desire. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of them suspended in this moment. Marcus, she began, but her words faltered as he leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. Just a kiss, he murmured, his voice low and inviting. Just to feel alive. Before she could think, he closed the distance, capturing her lips with his. The kiss was electric, igniting a fire within her that she had thought long extinguished. Every thought of her marriage, every ounce of guilt slipped away as she melted against him, lost in the moment. But reality crashed back in an instant. Panic flooded through her as she pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed. What have we done? Marcus looked at her, a mix of understanding and desire in his gaze. What we've done is embrace a feeling we both need. Elena's heart raced as she backed away, her pulse pounding in her ears. I can't. I'm married. I know, he replied softly, a hint of sadness in his voice. But does that mean you don't feel something for me? I shouldn't, she said, her voice trembling. Sometimes, what we shouldn't do is exactly what we need, he whispered, Taking a step closer again, the gravity of his words hung heavy in the air. And for a fleeting moment, Elena considered surrendering to the allure of the forbidden, but the thought of Daniel pierced through her desire like a cold dagger. "I need to go," she said, her voice shaky as she turned to leave, the weight of her decision heavy on her heart. The days that followed were filled with turmoil. Each time she looked at Daniel, she felt a pang of guilt mingled with an undeniable longing for Marcus. She tried to bury the memory of the kiss, but it haunted her, a constant reminder of what she could have. Daniel remained blissfully unaware, engrossed in his work and oblivious to the turmoil brewing within her. They shared dinners, watched television, and went through the motions of married life, but the spark that once connected them had dimmed. Every touch felt hollow, every conversation mundane. Elena turned to Sophie, her confidant and anchor in the storm. One evening over wine, she found herself spilling everything of the kiss, the feelings, the tumultuous emotions. Sophie listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to intrigue. "Maybe you should explore this," Sophie suggested, her voice firm. "You can't deny your feelings, you owe it to yourself to discover what this is." "But at what cost?" Elena countered, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. "I have a life, a husband who loves me." "Do you love him?" Sophie asked, her eyes searching Elena's. Elena paused, the question hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "I care for him, but a broken bar. It's different." "Different how?" "There's no passion, no excitement," she admitted, the words spilling out. "And with Marcus, it's like I can breathe again, like I'm waking up from a long sleep." "Then maybe you should talk to him," Sophie said, her voice gentle. "Be honest about what you want." But honesty felt terrifying. The thought of confronting Daniel, of admitting her desires, paralyzed her. How could she explain the longing for something more without breaking the man who had been her rock? Days turned into weeks, and the tension within Elena mounted. Each day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing between the familiar comfort of her marriage and the intoxicating allure of Marcus. She began to see Marcus more frequently, their encounters filled with stolen moments and whispered secrets. Each meeting with Marcus intensified the longing inside her, a deep ache that only he seemed capable of alleviating. Their connection deepened as they shared their dreams, their fears, and their vulnerabilities. Each conversation pulled her further away from the life she knew, wrapping her in a cocoon of passion and desire. One rainy evening, they met in a small cafe. Copyright, the air thick with the scent of coffee and the sound of soft jazz. Marcus leaned in, his eyes alight with mischief. "I've been working on something," he said, his voice low. "What is it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Come see," he replied, standing up and beckoning her to follow him. Elena's heart raced as she followed him through the rain-soaked streets to his studio. The space was a haven of creativity, filled with canvases and sculptures, each one a reflection of his soul. "Wow," she breathed, taking in the vibrant colors and the chaos of creativity. Marcus smiled, his pride evident. "This is where I create, where I lose myself." He guided her to a canvas covered in a light cloth. "And there's a broken bar. This is what I've been working on for you." With a flourish, he pulled the cloth away, revealing a stunning portrait of Elena. Her heart soared as she took in the depth of emotion captured in the strokes of paint. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I wanted to capture who you are, not just what you look like," he replied, stepping closer. "There's so much more to you than you realize." The intensity of his gaze sent shivers down her spine. "You make me feel like I'm alive," she whispered, her heart racing. "I'm glad," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Because I want you to feel that way. In that moment, as the rain fell softly against the windows, Marcus stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. Their lips met in a kiss that ignited every fiber of her being. The world outside faded away as she surrendered to the kiss, a mix of longing and despair flooding through her. But as reality crept back in, panic set in once more. "Marcus," she gasped, pulling away. "I can't keep doing this." "Why not?" he pressed, his eyes searching hers. "Why can't you let yourself feel?" "Because I'm married," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't betray Daniel." "Is it betrayal if you're not fulfilled?" he asked, his voice a mixture of frustration and understanding. Elena felt torn, the battle raging inside her. "I don't want to hurt him, but what about you?" he challenged, stepping closer again, his presence overwhelming her senses. In that moment, she felt a wave of realization wash over her. The years of neglect, the routine of her marriage, the longing for something more, yet it all collided, leaving her breathless. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Then let me help you find out," he whispered, brushing a thumb against her cheek. His touch ignited something within her, a spark of courage that pushed against the walls she had built. She took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "What if I want to? Then let's explore it together," he urged, his gaze steady and unwavering. But fear gripped her, a cold hand wrapping around her heart. "What if I lose everything?" "Sometimes, to gain something, you have to let go of what's holding you back," he replied gently. The words hung in the air, a challenge that resonated deep within her. Could she truly walk away from her life? The thought sent a tremor through her. But then she considered the kiss, the way he made her feel alive, the connection that sparked every time they were together. "I need time," she said finally, stepping back, her heart heavy with indecision. "Take all the time you need," he replied softly, his expression understanding yet filled with longing. As she left the studio, the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her. The rain drummed against the pavement, mirroring the storm raging inside her. Each drop felt like a question, a reminder of the life she had built and the desires she had buried. Days turned into weeks as Elena wrestled with her feelings. She found herself lost in thought, torn between her loyalty to Daniel and her desire for something more. The mundane routines of her life felt suffocating, and the memory of Marcus lingered, haunting her dreams and waking moments. Daniel, oblivious to the turmoil within her, continued with his life, unaware of the shifting tides. Their interactions felt like an echo of what once was, but she could no longer deny the distance growing between them. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching television, Daniel reached for her hand, a simple gesture filled with warmth. But the touch felt different now, a stark reminder of the chasm that had formed between them. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etching his features. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "You've seemed distant lately," he continued, his brow furrowing. "I'm just busy with work," she replied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Let's plan a weekend getaway," he suggested, his eyes brightening. "Just the two of us." The thought filled her with dread. How could she enjoy a weekend away when her heart was elsewhere? "Maybe later," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Is everything okay?" he pressed, his concern palpable. Elena hesitated, feeling the weight of her decision bearing down on her. "I just a broken bar. I need some space." "Space?" he echoed, confusion etched on his face. "I'm feeling overwhelmed," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I need to sort things out." "All right," he said, the hurt in his eyes cutting deeper than she anticipated. As the days passed, the distance between them grew. Elena felt like a stranger in her own home. Each moment spent with Daniel a reminder of the life she had built but no longer wanted. The thought of Marcus lingered, a constant reminder of the passion and desire she craved. Finally, one evening, she found herself standing outside Marcus's studio, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. She had decided as she could no longer live a lie. She needed to confront her desires and see where they led. Marcus greeted her with a warm smile, his presence instantly calming her racing heart. "You came back," he said, his eyes bright with surprise. "I had to," she replied, her voice steady. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "About us?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yes," she admitted, her heart pounding. "I can't ignore what I feel anymore." Marcus reached for her hand, his touch sending electricity coursing through her. "What do you feel?" "I feel alive when I'm with you," she confessed, her breath hitching. "But I'm terrified of what that means." "Terrified of what?" he pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Of losing everything," she replied, her voice trembling. "Of hurting Daniel." "Sometimes, you have to choose yourself," he whispered, leaning in closer. "You deserve to be happy, Elena." The gravity of his words weighed heavily on her, and in that moment, she realized that she had spent too long putting others before herself. She took a deep breath, summoning the courage she had kept buried for so long. "I want to explore this," she said finally, her voice steady. "I want to know what it feels like to truly live." Marcus's expression softened, a mixture of relief and joy washing over him. "Then let's embrace it together." With that, they closed the distance between them, sharing a kiss that ignited the fire within her. It was a kiss filled with promise, passion, and a longing that had been denied for far too long. As they pulled away, Elena felt a wave of clarity wash over her. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt free to explore her desires, to embrace her passions, and to live authentically. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it head on. As she stood in Marcus's studio, surrounded by art and creativity, she felt a surge of hope. The forbidden kiss of lust had opened her eyes to a world filled with possibilities, and she was determined to embrace it. Elena's journey took her through a whirlwind of emotions, as she navigated the complexities of her relationship with Marcus. She found herself learning more about herself than she had in years. Each moment spent together was a lesson in passion and self-discovery. They explored the city, visiting galleries and attending art shows, their connection deepening with each shared experience. Marcus encouraged her to create, and soon, Elena found herself painting again, pouring her heart and soul onto the canvas. But as their relationship blossomed, the reality of her marriage loomed over her like a dark cloud. The guilt weighed heavily on her heart, and every time she saw Daniel, it felt like a betrayal. She had begun to communicate with him less, their conversations growing strained as the distance between them widened. One evening, while out for dinner with Marcus, she received a call from Daniel. Panic flooded her as she glanced at the screen. "I have to take this," she said, her heart racing. "Of course," Marcus replied, his expression concerned. Elena stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her face as she answered the call. "Hey, Daniel." "Hey," he said, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "I've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," she lied, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you sure?" "You've seemed distant lately," he said, concern lacing his words. "I've just been busy," she replied, her voice shaking. "Busy with what?" he pressed. And she felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Just work and a broken bar things, she stammered, trying to deflect his concern. Things? Elena, talk to me, he urged, his voice rising slightly. I just need some space, Daniel, she said finally, the words feeling like a betrayal. Space? He echoed, hurt creeping into his voice. Why? Because I'm feeling overwhelmed, she admitted, tears pricking at her eyes. Is this about us? He asked, his voice strained. I don't know, she replied, the truth spilling out. I need time to think. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Okay, he said finally, his voice quiet. Just a broken bar. Let me know when you're ready to talk. As she hung up, tears streamed down her face. She felt like she was breaking both of their hearts. And yet, she couldn't deny the longing that consumed her. When she returned to Marcus, he could see the turmoil etched on her face. Is everything all right? He asked gently. No, she said, her voice cracking. Just a broken bar hurt him. You needed to be honest, Marcus replied, stepping closer, his presence comforting. It's better to be truthful than to live a lie. But at what cost? She whispered, feeling the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The cost of losing yourself? He asked, his eyes steady. You deserve to be happy, Elena. His words resonated deep within her, and she realized she couldn't ignore her own happiness any longer. As they shared a quiet moment together, the warmth of Marcus's embrace enveloped her, and she knew she had to confront the reality of her situation. The following days were filled with uncertainty as Elena struggled to find clarity. Each time she saw Daniel, the ache of guilt grew heavier. But the moments spent with Marcus filled her with a sense of purpose. The contrast between her two lives became increasingly difficult to reconcile. One afternoon, as she sat in her studio, surrounded by her paintings, she felt a sudden wave of determination wash over her. She couldn't keep living in two worlds. She had to make a choice. She picked up her phone and dialed Daniel's number, her heart racing. Daniel, we need to talk, she said when he answered, her voice steady. Okay, he replied, the worry evident in his tone. Where? Let's meet at the cafe tilde copyright, she suggested, her stomach churning with anticipation and fear. When they sat across from each other, Elena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Daniel looked worn. The concern etched into his features. I'm glad you called, he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. Me too, she replied, taking a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. All right, he said, leaning in slightly. I'm listening. I've been feeling a broken bar. Lost, she admitted, the words feeling like a weight lifting. And I've been spending time with someone else. The silence that followed felt deafening. Daniel's expression shifted from concern to shock. Someone else? Yes, she said, tears brimming in her eyes. It's Marcus Hale. Marcus, the artist? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, she confirmed, her heart pounding. We've developed a connection that I can't ignore. Daniel's face fell, hurt flashing in his eyes. How long has this been going on? A few months, she admitted, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I've been so unhappy. His expression turned to one of disbelief. And you didn't think to talk to me about it? To let me know you were feeling this way? I was scared, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you. But you have, he said quietly, pain etched into his features. I thought we were happy, Elena. I thought we were building a life together. We were, she replied, her heart breaking. But I lost myself somewhere along the way. I stopped pursuing my passions, and I forgot who I was. Daniel shook his head, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. And you found yourself in someone else's arms? I didn't plan for it to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. But Marcus makes me feel alive. Alive? He echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. And what about us? What about our life? I can't keep living a lie, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. I need to be true to myself, and to you. Daniel's face fell, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of her confession hanging heavily between them. Do you love him? He asked finally, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know, she admitted, her heart aching, but I care for him deeply. And I need to explore that. Explore? He repeated, disbelief lacing his words. And what about us? I don't want to hurt you, she said, her heart breaking. But I can't ignore this feeling. Daniel leaned back in his chair, hurt and betrayal etched across his features. So this is it? You're choosing him? I'm choosing myself, she said, her voice steady. I need to figure out who I am outside of this marriage. Daniel looked away, a mixture of anger and sorrow clouding his expression. I can't believe you would do this to us. I never meant to hurt you, she said, her heart aching. But I can't pretend anymore. As they sat in silence, the weight of her choice settled heavily between them. The love they had built felt like it was crumbling, and the pain of the moment threatened to consume them both. I need time, Daniel said finally, his voice quiet. I need to process this. I understand, she replied, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. As they parted ways, Elena felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. She had finally spoken her truth, but it came at a cost. The weight of her decision felt heavy on her heart, and she knew that the path ahead would be filled with uncertainty. In the days that followed, Elena found herself lost in a whirlwind of emotions. The thrill of pursuing her desires with Marcus was intoxicating, but the guilt of leaving Daniel hung heavily on her heart. She often found herself lost in thought, grappling with the consequences of her choices. Marcus was a constant source of comfort, his presence bringing light to her darkest moments. They spent evenings wrapped in each other's arms, their connection deepening with every shared experience. But as the days turned into weeks, Elena couldn't shake the guilt that lingered in the back of her mind. Guilt is a heavy burden to carry, Marcus said gently, his fingers brushing against her cheek. But you made a choice to pursue what makes you happy. I know, she replied, tears welling in her eyes. But what if I've destroyed something good? Sometimes, we have to break things to create something new, he said softly. You deserve to embrace your happiness, Elena. But at what cost? She whispered, her heart aching. The cost of living authentically, he replied, his gaze steady. You can't live your life for someone else. His words resonated deep within her, and she felt a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. She had spent so long prioritizing others' happiness over her own, and it was time to reclaim her life. In the weeks that followed, Elena continued to explore her art, her creativity blossoming as she poured her heart onto the canvas. She began to find joy in the process, the colors and strokes becoming an outlet for her emotions. But as her relationship with Marcus deepened, the guilt over her past lingered. The weight of Daniel's heartache hung heavy on her heart, and she couldn't escape the feeling of loss. One day, while painting in her studio, she found herself reflecting on her journey. The choices she had made had led her here, to a place of newfound freedom and exploration. But the shadows of her past lingered, reminding her of the pain she had caused. As she stepped back to admire her work, a sense of clarity washed over her. She needed to confront Daniel one last time, to offer him the closure they both deserved. That evening, she called him, her heart racing. "Daniel, can we meet again?" she asked, her voice steady. "Of course," he replied, his tone cautious. "Where?" "Let's meet at the park," she suggested, hoping for a more peaceful atmosphere. When they met, the tension in the air was palpable. Daniel looked weary, the weight of their previous conversation still lingering between them. "Thank you for coming," she said, her heart heavy. "Of course," he replied, his expression guarded. "I wanted to talk about what happened," she began, her voice trembling. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Okay," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I realize now that I've been neglecting my own happiness," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "And in doing so, I hurt you deeply." "I don't understand how you could do this," he replied, hurt flashing in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her heart aching. "But I can't ignore my own desires anymore. I just wish you would have talked to me," he said quietly, pain evident in his voice. "I was scared," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt you or destroy what we had." "But you did," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," she said, her heart heavy, "and I'm so sorry for that." "You deserve better than what I've given you." Daniel looked away, his expression filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to drag this out any longer," she said, her voice steady. "I think it's best if we part ways." Silence enveloped them, and the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. "Part ways?" he repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. "Just like that?" "It's what's best for both of us," she said, her heart aching. "I need to figure out who I'm without you." Daniel looked at her, pain etched into his features. "And what if I want to fight for us?" "I can't ask you to do that," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "I need to be true to myself." He sighed heavily, the hurt and betrayal evident in his eyes. "I never wanted this," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Neither did I," she admitted, her heart breaking. "But I can't keep living a lie." As they stood in the fading light of the day, Elena felt a wave of finality wash over her. This was the end of a chapter, a painful but necessary step toward healing and self-discovery. "I hope you find happiness," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with sorrow. "I hope you do too," she replied, tears streaming down her face. As they parted ways, Elena felt a mix of grief and relief. She had finally confronted her past, and though it hurt deeply, she knew it was the right choice. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom. In the days that followed, she threw herself into her art, using the pain of her past as fuel for her creativity. She found solace in the strokes of paint, the colors becoming a vibrant expression of her emotions. Marcus was there to support her, his presence a comforting reminder of the passion and desire she had craved. They continued to explore their relationship, their connection deepening as they navigated the complexities of love and desire. But as the months passed, Elena realized that healing wasn't linear. There were days filled with joy and excitement, but also moments of doubt and uncertainty. The shadows of her past sometimes crept back in, reminding her of the pain she had caused. One afternoon, as she stood in front of her easel, lost in thought, Marcus entered the studio, a warm smile on his face. "Hey, beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Hey," she replied, her heart swelling at his affection. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked, his eyes sparkling. "Sure," she said, setting down her brush. As they walked through the park, the sun casting a warm glow around them, Elena felt a sense of peace. The beauty of nature surrounded her, and she allowed herself to breathe in the moment. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About us." "Yeah?" she replied, her heart racing. "I want to know where you see this going," he said, his gaze steady. Elena felt a mix of excitement and fear. "I want to explore this with you," she admitted, her heart pounding. "But I'm still figuring things out." "Take your time," he replied, his expression understanding. "I'm here for you." As they continued walking, Elena felt a surge of hope. She was finally embracing her desires, allowing herself to feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. But as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the park, she couldn't shake the lingering doubts. Could she truly allow herself to love again, to embrace the passion and excitement that Marcus brought into her life? In the weeks that followed, Elena continued to navigate her emotions, the path of self-discovery proving both exhilarating and terrifying. Each day was filled with a mixture of joy and uncertainty as she learned to trust herself and her desires. Marcus remained a constant source of support, his unwavering affection helping her find strength in vulnerability. They spent countless hours together, exploring art, life, and each other's dreams. With every shared experience, Elena felt herself blossoming, her heart opening to the possibilities that lay ahead. But the echoes of her past still haunted her. The guilt over her choices and the pain she had caused Daniel lingered, threatening to overshadow her newfound happiness. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps she had made a mistake. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of Marcus's studio, watching the sunset, Elena felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the beauty of the moment filled her heart with a sense of peace. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Marcus replied, his gaze focused on her. "About my past," she admitted, her heart aching. "About Daniel." Marcus turned to her, his expression gentle. "I think it's natural to reflect on the past," he said softly. "But you can't let it define your future." "I know," she replied, tears brimming in her eyes. "I just wish I could have done things differently." "Regret can be a heavy burden to carry," he said, his voice soothing. "But it's important to remember that every choice leads us to where we are now, and where we are now is beautiful." Elena nodded, the weight of his words resonating deep within her. "You're right," she said, taking a deep breath. "I need to let go of that guilt and embrace this moment." Marcus reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You deserve to be happy, Elena," he said, his gaze steady. "Don't forget that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over them, Elena felt a renewed sense of hope. She had come so far on her journey of self-discovery, and while the shadows of her past would always linger, she was ready to embrace the future. With Marcus by her side, she felt a sense of possibility blooming within her. Together, they would navigate the complexities of love, passion, and desire, and she was determined to live authentically. In the weeks that followed, Elena continued to pour her heart into her art, using it as an outlet for her emotions. The colors and strokes became a reflection of her journey, each piece telling a story of pain, healing, and hope. As her relationship with Marcus deepened, they explored new horizons together. They attended art shows, visited galleries, and engaged in deep conversations that filled their souls with warmth. With each shared experience, Elena felt herself blossoming, the weight of her past slowly lifting. One day, As they walked hand in hand through a bustling art festival, Elena turned to Marcus, a smile spreading across her face. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she said, her heart swelling with joy. Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth. "You deserve this happiness, Elena," he replied, his voice steady. "You fought hard for it." As they continued exploring the festival, Elena felt a sense of freedom wash over her. She was no longer defined by her past, and the future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. But as the weeks turned into months, Elena still grappled with her emotions. The guilt over her choices would sometimes rear its head, threatening to overshadow her newfound happiness. One evening, as they cuddled on the couch, Marcus looked at her, concern etched on his face. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.